Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. And it's Wednesday morning, February 16th, 2021. Hope everybody's doing okay today. Good morning to those who are on here. Hey, Gail. Good morning, Brian. Good morning, Diana, over on the Near Churches page. Good to see you. We're ready for Ephesians chapter 6 today, if you're following along. Plan is today to do Ephesians 6, 1 through 9, and then tomorrow we will finish the book of Ephesians. So, that is where we are. Good morning, Owsleys. Good morning, Lyle. Good to see you today. All right. Ephesians chapter 6 and the first 9 verses. So we're talking about some domestic issues. We're talking about walking as children of light in this particular section. And starting back up in back into chapter 4, but chapter 5 begins talking about that. Hey, Miss Louise. And hey, Miss Connie. Starting in chapter 5, really beginning in verse 22, in a way, the domestic side, you might say, of the Christian walk is addressed. Now, I know in Ephesians 5, 22 through 33, which we talked about yesterday, the primary subject matter is Christ and the church, but you notice in verse 33 there, Paul says, basically, even though I'm talking about Christ and the church, he says, let each one of you love his wife in particular, and the wife see that she reverence or respects her husband. So, yes, primary subject is Christ and the church, but there's a lot to learn for husbands and wives in the last section of chapter 5. Good morning, Sheila. Good to see you. So, as we get into chapter 6, that discussion continues. Parent-child relationships, employer-employee relationships. So that's where we are. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Okay? Obviously, there's not a lot to that. It's pretty straightforward. It's right. It's the righteous thing to do to obey your parents. And, honor your father and mother. To honor means to value, to hold in esteem. I think of Romans chapter 1 when Paul, let me look over there just real quick. When Paul at the end of Romans chapter 1 is going into pretty great detail of the sins that people were guilty of committing. A couple of the things he mentions, let me see here. Romans 1, verse 30, he talks about those who are disobedient to parents. He talks about those who are without natural affection. People who have departed from God are going to live life pretty much the way they want to live life without regard to others. Good morning, Miss Barbara. Good to see you. So, as Christians, that's who he's addressing here. He's addressing the church in Ephesus. Children. And this is interesting. So far as I can tell, the best my memory serves me right now, this is the only command given directly to children, okay, in the New Testament. And what is it? Well, obey your parents. There's to be order in the home. And it seems to me, in a lot of ways, the role has been reversed, where the parents' knowledge and wisdom is subjected to that of the child's wishes. And it's completely reversed. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. This is the right thing to do. In the Lord. Well, what does that mean? That phrase is used a few times, okay? For instance, in terms of widows, they can marry only in the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 talks about that. Obey your parents in the Lord. I think what this has to do with is not, okay, only if it's a Christian. This has to do with basically like with what is acceptable to the Lord. And Paul talks about that extensively in chapter 5 as we've studied. Do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So when we obey our parents in the Lord, the idea is that we're doing it in line with what the Lord has instructed. And of course, you see this throughout the Bible, the patriarchal age, the Mosaic age, and the Christian age. Jesus himself did this. You read Luke 2, verses 50 through 52, Jesus was subject to his parents. Well, that's the God-given order. Proverbs talks a lot about that too. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, and then here's the promise, that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. So if you have marginal readings, you'll find that this is in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 12, Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 6, and then there are other passages in the Pentateuch that address this as God was laying out the code of laws, let's say, for the Israelites in the Promised Land. So those are child responsibilities. Now, one of the interesting things, so Ephesians, again, beginning in 5:22, on into chapter 6, down through verse 9, hey, Derek, good to see you, addresses these domestic responsibilities. Well, he does the same thing in his letter to the church at Colossae, but it's not as extensive. In Colossians, it starts in Colossians 3:18. So, for instance, the husband-wife relationship, Ephesians has a lot. Here's what Colossians says. Wives, submit to your own husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter toward them. Okay, so 2 verses. And then it goes from there. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And then he moves into what Paul addresses into chapter 6 here as well, bondservants. So they kind of complement one another, you might say. The end of Colossians 3 into Colossians 4, and then here in Ephesians chapters 5 and 6. And you, fathers, so we shift from child responsibilities to parental responsibilities. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. Provoke your children to wrath. You know, it's a responsibility of parents to discipline their children, to train them up to be properly behaved in society, you know, so they can, so people want to be around them. You know, they're going to go to school, they're going to be socialized, they're going to be out in public. The primary the responsibility for preparing a child for those environments is in the home within the first few years of life. And you know, if we just let our kids through the first few years of life just do whatever they want to do and talk to us however they want to talk to us and break the rules and whatever, but well, what do you think is going to happen when they get out into public? Again, into a school setting or something like that, around other children. Well, it's not going to go well for them. So our responsibility as parents is to prepare them at an early age for those environments. And so you don't provoke them to wrath. You have to discipline. Okay, Hebrews 12 talks about the chastening that our earthly fathers do, and it's not pleasant in the moment. We don't necessarily enjoy doing that, but that's our responsibility. But you don't provoke them to wrath in that. You're not overbearing. I was listening to a lecture on this recently about rearing children and how much more difficult we can make it than it really necessarily has to be in making too many rules. Children need rules and they need boundaries, but well, you can discourage them, and that's the idea here of provoking them to wrath, and that's in fact kind of the way Paul words it there in Colossians chapter 3. You don't oppress them. You're not some kind of dictator or tyrant as a parent, but you have to set the proper boundaries and give them a proper code by which to live while you have them at your home, at your house. Let's say, hey, Debbie, good to see you. So there's a lot that goes into that. Hey, Sheila. Sheila asks a question here. The promise of long life for obedience to parents. How does this apply to children not yet accountable dying? Well, I think what we're dealing with here, Sheila, a good question. So, honor your father and mother. That's a direct quote from Exodus 20 and verse 12, direct quote from the Ten Commandments. And then the phrase there in verse 3 of that it may be well with you and live long upon the earth, that's connected to the old law too. So, let me, I believe, I know where this is. I think it's in Deuteronomy Chapter 21. And let me look at this real quick. Yeah, listen to this, okay? Deuteronomy 21, beginning in verse 18. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his city, and they shall say to the elders of this city, This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. So that's the context of what Paul's saying here. Now, Paul is not advocating capital punishment for disobedient children. He's simply referring back to what the law said and the idea of honoring your father and mother, because there can be terrible consequences for not doing so. Now, again, obviously under the Christian dispensation, we don't have public stonings of children, thankfully. If we did, probably not many of us would be around right now. But it's the concept of, kind of like Romans 15:4, those things were written for us for our learning. And like I said, as far as best my memory serves me, this is the only commandment in the New Testament given directly to children. And the commandment is, obey your parents and do what's right. This is acceptable in the sight of God. Well, this plays off into eternity too. If you're a rebellious child, you're going to have to answer for God to that. How does this apply to children not yet accountable dying? I don't know. I don't know that it does necessarily. We hear terrible stories of young children, innocent children, dying. I would say those who have not reached the age of accountability, as we say it, and of course every child's different in that way, getting sick and dying. That doesn't necessarily have to do with obedience or disobedience to parents. That has to do with the reality of sickness and disease and death in the world. So I don't know if I answered your question there, Sheila, but I'm not sure, I guess, of the second part there. How does this apply to children not yet accountable dying? If you want to clarify something there, please feel free to do so, and I'll try to come back and clarify then what I said if there's a problem. So don't provoke your children to wrath. Don't discourage them, but bring them up in the... So the New King James says training and admonition, the instruction. And this word admonition is interesting because it means to encourage through reproof. You can do better than this, is the idea. You have much more... You have a lot more potential than you're reaching right now. You can do better. You can be better. Things like that. Children need that. They need to be, and well, we all do. We all need that type of reproof and correction. But this is within the context of the parental relationship to the children. It's the parent's responsibility to cause a child to realize that and to reach for their potential and to do the best that they can do. Verse 5, Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh. Some versions use the word slave, and I think we as Americans have a bad image of that within this context. We think of 19th century American slavery. What's the word that they would put? Plantation slavery, things like that. This is not similar. Okay, yes, that did exist then, but this is not what we're talking about here. Okay. This is more like employer-employee, or like a household servant, someone that was paid, who lived with you, who worked for you. Well, you be obedient to your masters. You do what you've been hired to do with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. And that's how you take on your responsibility, as if you were doing it for Christ himself. And that's, if you're a Christian and you have a job, that's how you should conduct yourself. Not with eye service as men pleasers, not just when the boss shows up do you get to work. You're dependable. You're on time. You're doing your job because you're a Christian. As bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men. And that's the framework here. It's always as to the Lord, and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. All right, so whether you're under someone's, in someone's servitude, or you just have a job somewhere, this is how you conduct yourself. It's always qualified by as if you were doing it to the Lord himself. And you masters, okay, now you've employed somebody. Do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven and there is no partiality with him. So conduct yourself. So, well, you go back to Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1. Be imitators of God as dear children. And that's exactly what he says. You have a master, conduct yourself like him. Whether you're the one being employed or whether you're the one doing the employing, be honest, work hard, as if you were doing it to the Lord himself. So those are these domesticated responsibilities. Husbands, wives, parents, children, employer, employee. I think that's the best way to frame that today. So I see a couple more comments have popped up here. Yeah, Connie, I think you're right there. The command would seem to only apply to children who had come to an age of knowing how to obey. Doesn't ensure long life for all children. That seems to be, if you're referring to Deuteronomy 21, I think you're correct there. If they haven't reached the age of accountability and died, would they not be saved? Yeah, safe. We have to be saved from sin, but if you've not reached that age where you know what sin is and you know what repentance is and the consequences of sin and the consequences of repentance, then you're not accountable. Paul says in Romans 7, there was a point in time when he was alive apart from the law, and we are all in that state, I would say, early on in life. We're alive apart from the law. We're not subject to it because we don't have the mental capacity to be subject to it. But when we reach the age, and like I said, we know every child is different in this way, well, then you become accountable, and you better conduct yourself accordingly. My point was, if the command comes with a promise of long life, an infant or small child dying wasn't disobedient and is not the promise to them also. Got you. Well, again, and thank you for clarifying, Sheila. The promise of long life. Okay. Well, again, what we have to remember is not one of us is promised long life. With it's like Romans 5 tells us. When sin entered into the world, death entered into the world. The day you eat thereof, you shall surely die. Okay? And that's built into the system, let's say it that way, of life. There is sickness, there are accidents. It doesn't necessarily mean that a child, let's say a child of a Christian, okay, or Christians, if they die in infancy or if they die as a toddler in perhaps an accident or as cancer or something, it doesn't mean that they were disobedient or that this promise doesn't apply to them. We have to remember the bigger picture of life in general and the reality of sin and sickness and disease and death and all of that. That's just a part of existence. The teaching that's being done here is, children, obey your parents. I mean, that's the ultimate thing that's being taught here. This is the right thing to do. And then him, again, and Paul does this, throughout, I don't know if every one of his letters, but most of his writings, he'll write something and he'll say, the law says this, he'll refer back to the law of Moses. Romans 13, he does that, verses 8 through 10. Obviously, he does it here and so many other passages. So, the promise is to all, but it's within that context. Let's say the big picture of the reality of existence in a world where sin is, and where death is, and where suffering and disease is. All of that has to be taken into consideration. Wow, Brian. Brian, he's a brother in Christ. He's written for me before, actually, and I need to get him to write for me again. It says, My wife and I lost a child still in the womb. I'm sure the baby is safe. Well, you know, Brian, we are told that if we want to inherit the kingdom, we have to become like little children. You know, God knows us from the womb. He knows us from the moment of conception. That's the point in time where we come into existence, and then we live for all eternity. And, you know, I think of passage, is it in Luke, or Matthew or Luke chapter 10 on the limited commission, where we are told that there's not even a sparrow that falls to the ground and our Father doesn't know about it. And the comparison there is, how much more valuable are you than a bird that falls out of the sky? Yeah, safe. Absolutely. This version says that it may go well. Yeah, that it may go well. That doesn't mean that life always goes well. But again, the context is written to the church at Ephesus, to Christians. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. So these are, you know, whoever he was addressing here, however many kids were in the congregation there, they were alive, and Paul's instruction to them is, do what your parents tell you to do. This is right in the sight of the Lord. So, yeah, that's a good point, Connie. It may go well. Yeah. Okay, guys. That's what I've got for today. I think tomorrow we'll finish the book, Ephesians 6, beginning in verse 10 down through verse 24, the Christian armor, and some other greetings as Paul closes. Hey, I appreciate all the interaction today, and always feel free to do that and go back and forth with each other, and with me too. That's absolutely encouraged. So appreciate you being on here today. If you're unable to get out tonight, Mammoth will be streaming their Bible class, the adult Bible class. We're going to study, thank you, Connie, we're going to study from Psalm 37 tonight, a contrast of the wicked and the righteous. Pretty interesting chapter. So if you're unable to get out or whatever tonight, maybe you're in a place that doesn't have Wednesday night services, join us here at 7, and we'll do some singing and then study from Psalm chapter 37. All right, guys, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11, and we will finish the book of Ephesians.